Okay, it's on. It's on. The best is not last. I promise you that. That's a guarantee. And also, Joel, you cheated. All you did was just put headlines on the screen. Like, so somebody just pull up Mike the Cop. We're just going to play my videos for an hour, and I'll be as good as Joel was. Give me a break. He prepared. Yeah. This whole thing between me and Steven is escalating. I told my wife, I said, like, next time I preach, I'm going to go hard in the paint. And she's like, no, you're not. I need to stop this right now because it's going to get ugly. And it would. I have no end in sight of what this could be. So we'll see where that goes. Who's been in Facebook jail? My fellow inmates. I have spent, and this is not an exaggeration, more than 24 months in Facebook jail. I've done hard time, and I am here to tell my story. You know, there's a lot of people go into the real jail and come out, Christian and jacked from doing burpees and stuff. I did not get jacked, but I have become more of a Christian dealing with Facebook jail. I want to just open up with a little bit of a story about Frogger and my granny. So these slides are going to be, I just sent James the slides this morning, so he may or may not, there we go, that's my granny. She's a cranky 90-some-year-old lady. I call her my granny. I've always called her my granny. So she lives in Kentucky right now, and I grew up, I was born in Missouri, lived in Texas and Illinois. While my dad was doing ministry, we moved back to his hometown of Taylor, which is a suburb of Detroit, which is affectionately known as Taylor-tucky. And it is 100% accurate. Like, their stereotypes are funny for a reason. It's because they're actually true, right? So you shouldn't stereotype people. Yeah, you should. You should. Because it's usually true. Okay, so my granny, the granny before her, like when I would go visit in Kentucky, my great-granny was about this tall, and she chewed tobacco, and my parents made me kiss her anyway. And so cars on blocks, women chewing tobacco, this is my life, okay? So when I say, like, I'm from Taylor-tucky, like, it's accurate, right? So that's my granny, anyway. And so here I am. I moved to Michigan, and the greatest state ever. Okay, and I moved. Yeah, even though we look at other people's plays. Okay. Hey, listen, man, do you want to win or not? Winners do what it takes to do it, okay? I told you, I have nothing to say this morning, really. I'm here for giggles, I guess. Okay, so I'm this 6-year-old kid, maybe, right? And my uncles at the time, my twin uncles, and they still live at my grandmother's house. We live in the basement. My dad was a pastor. We were dirt poor. And so we're living in the basement of this 900-square-foot house with all these other people. And my uncles had this thing called Atari, right? And we got some Atari fans, serious Atari fans. Okay. This is the easiest crowd ever. Atari! Ah! Great, yeah. So there was this game, Frogger, right? And the object of the game is to get your frog, which you see in between a couple of cars on there, high-definition frog, and you have to get across traffic, and then for some reason, right next to a major expressway is a logging operation, and turtles. This is normal, and so no one questioned why this was, but here we are using this joystick to get across, and it wasn't my Atari, it was my uncle's, but when they were gone, I would go sit down and play this Atari game, and I loved Frogger. And my granny, I don't think she chewed tobacco, at least in front of me, but anyway, she sits down, and what are you doing? And I'm gonna play Frogger, and I taught my granny how to play Frogger, and soon my granny took over the Atari and was playing Frogger more than me, right? And this was my first experience at the age of 6 of being a digital missionary, teaching someone how to do something that they didn't understand previously on a medium that they didn't understand very well. Because Atari to her, as someone who grew up using an outhouse in the middle of nowhere, to see a frog jumping across turtles and logs on a screen was mind-blowing, right? You and I look at this like it's ancient technology. She looked at it like it was like the year 3000, right? Like, what's going on? These frogs move on my TV screen. Normally it's just like Fantasy Island. This is weird, right? So that's where my story really begins, and I've always wanted to use new mediums to communicate the truth or enjoyment. I've just had a knack for this stuff since the beginning. And so, I want to be really clear, I'm not preaching a sermon to you. I don't know as much about American history as anybody else that has been on this stage this week, okay? So you're going to get the least amount of Bible and the least amount of knowledge from me today, right now, okay? But what I do want to give you, and if you would like to listen, I would like to give you a framework for how you can leverage digital mediums, social media, or other platforms for the sake of the gospel, okay? If I can give you that framework for you to better understand how you can use these things to communicate the truth of the gospel, is that okay? Who wants that? All right, cool. If you don't want it, you can leave now. There's nothing else for you. That's what I'm going to give you, and if you don't want it, if you didn't raise your hand, grab a coffee and leave. It's pointless for you to be here. Okay. In order to understand, though, I want to ultimately get to a method, but in order to understand that method, oh, by the way, there was another slide in here. What? Is anything he makes fun of me about relevant anymore? Just look at it, will you? Haven't all of our speakers been talking against this very image the whole week? Side note, I'm actually using my method right now to use digital media to convince you of something. Keep an eye on that guy. I don't know. In order to employ methods, I have to be able to explain the medium, a little bit about using a medium, and I have to be able to encourage you to use the right motives. Because if we don't understand the medium and we don't check our motives, the method is sort of irrelevant, right? We could run a game plan, as it were. I can give you this framework for how to use social media better, how to use digital mediums better as a missionary. But I want you to understand these things. And again, I'm not preaching a sermon. The idea of the Great Commission, though, is relevant and is underlying all of this, right? All authority was given to Christ, and so he said, because of that, all this authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, you go and make disciples of all nations. And so in Paul's time, reaching the known world with the gospel involved, whether that was walking or whether that was getting on a ship and sailing across some body of water to get there. Now we have the ability to go online and kind of communicate through this medium, and we have no less a responsibility to communicate the gospel there than in any other place. Whether it's in person or whether it's online, the responsibility to communicate the truth of the gospel and make disciples holds true no matter what. So this undergirds everything that I'm talking about. Now, when it comes to the medium, social media, digital media is like a language. I remember in the year 2001, my wife and I packed up and moved to Costa Rica with our 2 kids. We committed to be there a year. We were open to longer, and seeing now, like, dealing with Michigan weather, I should have stayed in Costa Rica forever, but we didn't. We were there for a year, and we actually had our 3rd child was born there. And when we packed up to go, I was like pretty confident about going to Costa Rica when it came to the language because, hey, I had 2 years of high school Spanish, man. La biblioteca, right? Like, I was ready. And then I went to college and I did 3 semesters of Spanish in college, right? Miguel es muy guapo, right? Like, I am like up there on my Spanish. And so The only thing I worried about packing and getting ready was not a Spanish dictionary. I had a bag, and I kid you not, it was an entire 70-pound bag. I think I had to pay overage charges for it, full of Charles Spurgeon books. I literally took my wife, my 2 kids, and Charles Spurgeon to Costa Rica. That was like what I did. And I remember so clearly, we had all these bags, and we landed in the airport, and people started talking Spanish around me. And I looked at my wife and I said, we're in trouble. I don't understand anything that is being said right now, right? Fast forward and like I acclimated, right? But if you don't know the language, if you don't understand the medium through which people are communicating, it becomes virtually impossible to do the job of a missionary. You have to understand that medium. And imagine, like now we communicate through memes and GIFs, right? I have entire conversations with my friends, no words are typed. It's literally just image or GIF, one back and forth, and it's communicating something because we understand that medium. I mean, imagine an archaeologist in the year 3000 discovering a computer, and they plug it in and they look, and the wallpaper is, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott. And they're staring at this going, who is Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott? This appeared to be a great man who led an army in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Like, what is this, right? It's like we try to discern hieroglyphics, right? If we landed in a cave in Egypt and we're looking at hieroglyphics and we're like, what does this mean, right? We don't understand it. We have to decipher it. We have to discern it. And we have to understand the medium, the language. And there's a lot of options. When we talk about media, digital platforms, it's not the same for everybody. For me, it was a lot of video, but for many, it can be audio, right? There's podcasting. There's all sorts of options for audio. There's spaces on X now or whatever that you can host audio discussions. It's not just video and it's not just audio, but you can still write, right? Look at Megan that was here. That's what she does. She uses writing as her primary medium to communicate that truth and to be a digital missionary. And so whatever that is for you, just because I'm up here and did primarily video, it doesn't mean that that's necessarily the right medium for you. You need to choose a medium that you feel comfortable with and that you understand, that you can actually leverage, okay? So just consider that. There's advantages and there's disadvantages to social media, okay? The advantage is leverage because you're able to reach a lot of people without a lot of lift. So there's a tremendous advantage to using media in this way. There's another big advantage, and that's connections, right? You can make amazing connections on social media. And I know a lot of people, they just want to chuck social media out the window. They want to chuck it all, and I don't want anything to do with it. And that's fine. That's okay. I'm just giving you the advantages and disadvantages objectively. But these connections, they're very real. I don't know if Michael Foster's in the room or not, or wherever he's at, but he's one of the speakers. And I actually, through a church planting network that I learned about online and began to connect through that network, ultimately, because of digital media, built a connection and ultimately a lifelong friendship with Michael Foster, who's here today. And it all comes back together. And that happened because of digital media. So we can't undervalue the fact that real, meaningful connection can and does happen because of what we can do on these platforms. We can't discount that. It's a huge advantage. Another major advantage is that it's a gauge of culture. We have to understand the people that we're trying to reach, okay? A missionary doesn't just show up and try to import their culture onto another culture, right? When we talked about the crisis-facing culture in the panel yesterday, I loved how Megan answered that question about it's the customs and the ideologies of that particular people. And so you leave here and go somewhere else, you have to understand the culture. It's no different than when you sort of plug in and connect online. You have to understand what's going on in culture in order to effectively use it, and social media can give you that. You can gauge the culture that way instead of insulating yourself from it. But there's some big disadvantages that you need to be aware of. Miscommunication. That's a big one. If you cannot communicate properly, if you don't understand how to use the medium, then you're going to be misunderstood. And that there's a certain aspect of that is, of course, just you're either good or bad at saying something, right? Whether in person or online, that could be true. But there's a lot of especially as you get older and you don't keep up with how things are done. I mean, have you ever looked at your 2008 Facebook posts? They're horrible, right? Mike is feeling really hungry because I'm at Applebee's. Like, what? Who cared? Why did I post that? That's stupid, right? But the machine says, tell the world how you're feeling, where you're at, whatever. And now, though, you don't communicate that way now. It's shifted. And so if you don't pay attention to that, then you can miss it and you can miscommunicate, and people might not take you seriously because you're not using that medium properly. So there's a disadvantage if you don't keep up, right? Then you've got to deal with idiots. And here's the fact, though, right? We think the internet has made us dumb. I disagree. I think we've always been dumb. The internet just makes it really obvious. People have not changed. People are broken, flawed, sinful human beings who reject their creator and do a lot of dumb stuff, okay? And we're all in need of a savior. And nothing will expose that faster than 10 minutes on Facebook, okay? So it's not that those people have somehow become worse as a general statement. No, it's just that we're hyper exposed to it because we see it all the time. It's staring us in the face. And so we have to be willing to deal with that if we're going to deal properly on social media. We need to be aware of it. But it's a disadvantage because it can be discouraging, it can be frustrating, okay? And then dehumanization. This is probably the biggest disadvantage, I think, of social media or how people use it, is dehumanization. You know, Mike Tyson has that quote, everybody's got a plan till you get punched in the face, right? We say things and treat people a certain way online that we would never do in person. And we, if we are representing truth, then yeah, we got to be clear about it, but we don't have to be jerks about it, okay? Clarity is a kindness, but being a jerk is just being a jerk, okay? So the command to love God and love our neighbor, right? Like the two great commandments, they don't get to be set aside when you log in. Okay, when you're going to make a post, when you're going to send that comment, when you're going to shoot off that DM, those don't get set aside. So we don't have the option to just hang up our Christian principles because we're on this platform. No, but it is a disadvantage because it's easy because we're not face to face, it's easy to dehumanize people. So we have to battle to keep that human element in there. Now let's talk about the motives. There's poor motives and there's proper motives. Poor motive, getting likes. That is a really poor motive. I've been guilty of that. So have you probably. You post about how great and crispy your lawn looks on a spring day, and you expect everybody in the neighborhood and Facebook group to just love you for it and like that post, and you're like, man, only 2 likes, nobody cares. You're right, nobody does care, right? So like we can overinflate ourselves. Pride can sink in so deep, so fast when it comes to social media if our motive is to get attention and eyeballs on what we're doing for the sake of getting attention and eyeballs on us. So that is a very poor motive. The scripture says, if it was written today, what does it profit a man if he gains all the likes but loses his own soul? Right? So like we can't be chasing approval from people. Needing approval online is no better than needing approval in person, right? Our Heavenly Father has already approved of us in the work of His Son, Jesus Christ. I don't need to seek that online. I don't need to seek it from this room, okay? And so if your motive is to get attention for yourself, that's a problem, right? And the Bible says if your right hand offends you, cut it off. And so some of you, maybe, instead of learning how to use social media in this brief time we had together, maybe you're going to learn that you need to not be using it. You might be learning to give it up. You might be saying, you know what, this isn't for me. Maybe I shouldn't be a digital missionary. Maybe I should just go back to normal life and take a break for a while. And that's okay, because if being online and if engaging online is not an outworking of the love of God and love of your brother, love of your neighbor, then what good is it doing in your life? What benefit is it adding, right? So maybe this experience online that you give yourself, whether every day or whether every hour, every minute, doom scrolling on the toilet, whatever you're doing till your legs are numb. I mean, I can't be the only one. Looking for a little bit of sympathy here, right? This is the tough work of digital missionary, right? I'm suffering for the Lord on the toilet, scrolling, so that I could be here to share this information with you. Don't touch my phone, by the way. Literally, it's a health hazard, so just don't touch it. So, another bad motive is being right. The need to be right over the need to be faithful. Okay, the need to be right is dangerous. It's a poor motive. 1 Corinthians 1:20, Paul says, where's the one who's wise? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the debater of this age? God made the world's wisdom foolish. Stop expecting that you're going to have a doctorate level philosophical or theological conversation with Aunt Maud who doesn't like your post. Okay? Trying to be right all the time is exhausting. But being loving and being clear, you can have energy for that, for ongoing. You can be fueled for that. But trying to be right, that's a dead end. Okay, that's a poor motive. And a lot of people are out there trying to be right, but they're not being faithful. And so just trying to do that is a poor motive. Now, what is a proper motive? First of all, I think reaching souls is a proper motive. Okay? The internet allows us to have this one-to-many communication. Okay? And I don't know how many people are in this room today. Let's just call it 300 people. So I'm here. It took me an hour to drive down here this morning to speak to 300 people. I have to drive an hour back home, so I've spent 2 hours on the road to speak to 300 people for an hour. I could take the same 2 hours and literally reach 30,000 people on the internet. So there is a tremendous advantage if we view social media as a means to reach souls, as a means to connect one to many. There's nothing like it. It's a very powerful tool of leverage to reach people with the right motive, of course. To remain faithful, right? That's the other motive. So instead of being right, we want to remain faithful. I've kind of already covered that, so I'm not going to belabor the point. So if we're going to choose to engage on any kind of digital platform, we have to do so accepting the responsibility to have a good understanding of that platform, to seek to understand it for what it is, to put it in its proper place, and to have the right motive. The words of one of my favorite philosophers of all time, Uncle Ben from Spider-Man. With great power comes, see? You know him more than Aristotle, don't you? He's better, okay? So with that responsibility in mind, now we can talk about the method. So the framework, if you guys can put that up there, it has like arrows on it. There we go. Okay, this is the framework. This is sort of like the how, okay? We put out content that is consistent and faithful to the gospel, to the message we're trying to proclaim, to convey. We then seek to interact with people who interact with that content. Those that interact with your content, you have an opportunity to invest further into those relationships, to communicate the gospel, to love your neighbor through those interactions. We do that for a season of time, and then we assess. We look and say, am I being effective at the mission that I'm setting out to do? And for a lot of us in this room, we will probably have never actually stopped and took even just 15 minutes to think, what am I doing on social media? What am I accomplishing for the kingdom on social media? If the answer is nothing, then I think it's fair to say, why are you there? Right? So what are you doing? What is your mission on social media? If you want to be a digital missionary, if you want to be a Christian on social media and convey these things, maybe it's worth sitting down and going, what am I actually going to post? What do I hope happens as a result of me actually engaging on this platform? Start with the end in mind. And so we can't assess that if we don't know what that is. And so if you do one thing after we have our time together here in this session, if you do one thing, go think about for a little while, what does it look like for me to be faithful on the platform that I prefer to be on? What is my mission there? How do I participate in the Great Commission? How do I participate in being faithful to love God and love my neighbor? How do I speak clear truth into the culture? How do I engage here in a way that does something for the kingdom? What am I trying to accomplish? Then you can assess it and say, is what I'm doing, what I'm saying, how I'm communicating, is it doing the job that I believe that God has for me to do? And if it's not, then you need to change it. Or chuck it. One of the two. Okay? So these methods, and what I did today was, there is a book called Missionary Methods, St. Paul's or Ours. It's by a missionary. His name is Roland Allen, and he's dead. But you can read the book. And he has a section on the book about Paul's preaching. And he said everywhere that Paul went and preached, his preaching had certain elements and characteristics. And he listed 9 of them. And so all I'm doing is giving a high 30,000-foot view of his 9 characteristics, basically, of Paul's preaching. And I'm bringing it into the now to kind of tell you this is how it translates now on the kind of content that you should be posting on social media if you want to be a clear truth communicator, okay? If you want to be a digital missionary. So the first thing Roland Allen said is an appeal to the past. This is the first characteristic. So your content must make an appeal to the past, an attempt to win sympathy by a statement of truth common to him and to his hearers. This statement of common belief creates naturally a bond of union. It ensures that the speaker starts with agreement and approval of his hearers. I whittle that down to one word, and that is relatable. What you put out there needs to be relatable. Okay? If you start posting weird quotes of an 8th century theologian that no one understands, you're not posting something relatable, okay? If you post about how great Ohio is, it's not relatable. People don't get that. So your content has to be relatable. It starts with a point of saying, like, where can I find a point of commonality that these people who see this post can relate to? And start there. Okay? It starts with an agreement and an approval of your hearers, right? Everybody understands loving your child, right? So you can start with something about raising your children or how you love your children, and people will find that relatable because in general, most people are protective and love their children. And so that is a great starting point. And if you can get people to agree that loving your children means telling them the truth, then you can take it a step further later and say, then I can't tell my daughter she's a boy, and I can't tell my boy that he's a girl, right? But you start at the point of agreement, like, do you love your child? Well, of course so. Of course I do, right? So we start with content that is relatable. Number 2, He said, the preaching of Paul gave a statement of facts, an assertion of things which can be understood, apprehended, accepted, disputed, or proved. A presentation of the concrete, tangible, homely story of something easily grasped. The story of life and death. So your content must be valuable. It must be eternally valuable. Everyone is asking the same questions. I heard one time Vodi Bakum speak, and he said people always ask the same 4 questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What's wrong with the world? And how can we fix it? Everyone asks some form of those questions. And so if we can relate to people on those questions, we can begin to bring value to that by telling the ultimate story of life and death. I have to bring value to the table. It can't just be about me. I have to bring some sense of an awareness of the eternal story to the table and bring value. Number 3, he said an answer to the inevitable objection, to the instinctive protest. Anytime you're going to say a true statement, someone is going to object to it. And you need to be able to think about, if I say this thing, that's true, what are people going to object to about it? What is going to be their instinctive pushback on this statement of truth? And if you can predict that accurately, your content will be thoughtful. You have to put some thought into what you're saying. And it's easy. We can look at the Babylon Bee and laugh at those articles, but I can promise you a handful of them probably happen on the toilet scroll. Probably. Yes? Yes. But a lot of them, and I know this because I've made a lot of content, a lot of times some of the shortest, most effective content took hours to think about. It was a long process of really thinking about, how do I phrase this? How do I put this? Because I know what the pushback's going to be, and I want to beat that to the punch. The Apostle Paul did that all the time. Read Romans, right? He constantly is making a truth statement, a claim, giving clear truth, and then he's saying, but you're going to think this. But God says this, right? He's predicting the pushback. And so we have to be thoughtful in our content that way. Number 4, an appeal to the spiritual needs of men, to be the craving for pardon. People are craving pardon. And so your content must be spiritual. We have to get to the thing beneath the thing. Sometimes people will say things online that they don't really mean. They're really saying something else. And this isn't just an online problem, it's a human communication problem. Sometimes we say something, but what we really mean is underneath it. And so we need to get at that with our content. We need to not be satisfied with just surface level exchanges, but we need to dig to the spiritual. Because at the end of the day, everything is spiritual. And I say that in a gospel-centered way, not in like some froofy horoscope thing or something. I don't mean that. Number 5, the content of Paul's preaching gave a grave warning. The rejection of God's message involves serious danger. So our content must be sincere. Our content must be sincere. People that are on the other end of that screen represent an eternal soul that will be with Christ or in hell. And because of that, our content must be sincere. We must not take ourselves too seriously. I mean, get to know me. I don't take myself seriously at all. But I do take the gospel seriously, and so must you if you're going to be an effective digital missionary. Which, if you're going to be on social media, guess what? You're representing the gospel. You're representing your church. You're representing the cause of Christ, whether you like it or not. And so you better be sincere. You better understand the reality of the dangers of what is going to happen to an eternal soul that rejects Christ. And we need to be able to communicate that. Number 6, a conciliatoriness. Man, Roland Allen, big words, buddy. Conciliatoriness and sympathy with the condition of his hearers. So our content must be sympathetic. It must be sympathetic to the people that we're communicating with. Boy, it is easy to get mad at Aunt Maud, who has posted for the 18th time that if you don't copy and paste this, you're going to burn in eternal flames, okay? It can be annoying, right? But, or the person that types in all caps, they're yelling at you constantly on social media, right? It's easy to get annoyed with people, but we must maintain a level of sympathy with the fact that they are a person. They are not just a 0 and a 1. They're a person on the other side. And we have to maintain that sympathy with the condition of our hearers. And this can be a moment for you to really shine, because if you can be authentic and recognize your own flaws and not take yourself too seriously, you can take them very seriously. You can really help people. You can really do something to build other people up when you understand I am flawed, I am weak, and so are they. And I can bring a sincerity and an authenticity and a sympathy to the table. Number 7, Paul's preaching, and so our social media content says it has to have courage in the open acknowledgement of difficulties which cannot be avoided, and in the direct assertion of unpalatable truth. At the end of the day, if you're posting content long enough, you are going to have to say something and stick by something that people are not going to like. That is just what is going to happen. The truth of the gospel and the truth of God's law confronts errors, sins, and evil in our day just as it always has. And so you're going to come to a point to where there's going to be something unpalatable to the people that are seeing it. They're going to unfriend you. They're going to unfollow you. They're going to push back against you. No matter what you do, no matter predicting anything and trying to circumvent the argument, no matter what you do, they're just not going to like it. And it's got to be an awareness that you have that you're going to come into that, because it's going to take courage. You have to be courageous. And you have to maintain that courage through those things. You can't just start and then not finish. You have to maintain your courage to communicate the truth. Why? Because it is a kindness. Because speaking the truth in love is what we're called to do. These are not contradictory terms. Number 8, he said a characteristic of Paul's preaching was respect. There is a careful presentation of suitable evidence. There is an appeal to the highest faculties in man. St. Paul speaks to men as naturally religious persons. Paul's preaching, in a lot of respects, what he's saying is it gave people the benefit of the doubt. He didn't automatically assume the worst about people. He assumed the best. So he gave a certain level of respect in his communication. I love Paul's sermon and this engagement on Mars Hill, if you look at it in the Acts of the Apostles. And he says, I see that you are like these religious people, and you're worshiping these gods, so much so that you even have one just in case you missed a god. You've got a whole section here dedicated to the unknown God, just so that you don't miss them. Like, good job. Like, he's trying to appeal, give them the most benefit of the doubt possible and be as respectful as possible before he goes, but let me tell you something. I know who that is. I know who the unknown God is. Let me tell you about him. Do you want to hear? Right? He didn't come in and just bash. He confronted their idolism with the truth by appealing to their highest faculty. Just a benefit of the doubt. Start there. It may devolve, but start there. Be respectful, right? I told you earlier, if you're going to be a jerk, just get off the internet. You're going to have to be respectful in it. And some people are going to misinterpret just speaking plain truth as being disrespectful. And that's on them, not necessarily on you. But in your heart and in your approach to your content, are you being respectful? And lastly, he said there is an unhesitating confidence in the truth of his message and in its power to meet and satisfy the spiritual needs of men. So lastly, your content must be biblical. Your content must be biblical. And this means you have a responsibility to know the scriptures. You have a responsibility to become a theologian. You have a responsibility that if you're going to communicate a gospel message, you ought to first understand that gospel message. Not to just parrot people you heard on a podcast. Not to just repeat what your pastor said, but to be able to communicate a message of the scriptures that has sunk deep down in you and done its work in you and on you first before it ever goes out to somebody else. And if there's any of the 9 characteristics that these missionary methods describe, this one is the most important. It's last, but it really is the groundwork. Because if you're not communicating the message of the scriptures, what message are you communicating? So you've got to be biblical. Here's my final thought. The greatest digital missionaries in the decade to come will be those with the skill to leverage social media to move relationships from digital to analog. To be able to move people from a connection you make digitally into a real-world connection that is meaningful and transformative in the analog, flesh and blood world. AI cannot replace human interaction. It just can't. So let me show you a couple pictures. I don't know where I put them. I did this presentation okay, that's good. That's Hallie. Hallie's older now, but this is the day that I met Hallie. And when I met her, she had a condition that has a long name that I don't know how to pronounce. But it was a bone marrow disorder. And this disorder had a very, very slim chance of being cured because it required some particular type of sequence of things in the bone marrow that would get transfused into her to fix it. And so when I met Hallie, I had been doing this Mike the Cop stuff online, and what we did was we gathered a group of people and had a wave of tens of thousands of people get tested to see if they were a match. I wanted to be a match, but you can't donate a bone marrow, at least for this transplant that they needed, if you ever had a broken bone. And I've had a lot of those, so I couldn't even try. I was not qualified. But we ended up finding a match, and then she was cured of this disease, and all of that started because there was a platform that I built of social media. And I don't say this to say, look at me. I'm saying this is what can happen when you do these things according to the framework that I just gave you, right? Any of you can make a difference in someone's life. And now, look at her now. There's another picture. And her battle was long from over. That's on the right, and there she is at church. And God has been doing some crazy cool things in her life over these years. The gospel witness has been strong with several of us like in the orbit around her and her organization, Hallie's Heroes. She ended up getting a rare cancer after that as a result of the transfusion, and then clearly lost part of a limb. But this girl has continued to fight and has continued to have the support of people that rallied around her that no one knew her before they heard about her on social media. And of course, she's got her family and people in her direct sphere. But I'm talking about, think about all of the people that were able to rally around that and see a life saved and transformed, and it started with social media. So a lot of people think, oh, social media, just chuck it out. Why? It's a God-given opportunity and medium to reach people. Here's another picture, and we'll wrap it up. I hang out with pagans, guys, so there's an OnlyFans shirt if you want that. It's uncomfortable laughter, isn't it? I don't know, should I laugh at OnlyFans? I don't know. People are going to know that I've been on it. All right, so, and if you are, repent. Okay, so it turns out when you hang out with pagans, they do pagan things, by the way. But there's a guy on the right. He's wearing that shirt that says Goon, and it says Goon Jitsu. His name's Mario. Mario DM'd me one day, and we started a conversation a couple of years ago, and I invited him to come meet me at Jiu-Jitsu, and he did. And now Mario and his newlywed wife and their 8-month-old son, Will, are in the lives of me and my wife now, and we're discipling them, and they're wanting to jump in on church planting and go alongside us in this journey to continue to proclaim the gospel. And it started with a DM. So I don't share these things to say, look at me. I don't live your life. I've lived mine. This is how I've engaged on social media, so I can only share my experience with you. But if I sat down and researched the number of lives who have been changed by effective communication online, it would be a lot. We'd be here a while. And your Hallie or your Mario is out there if you want to be a digital missionary. And you have, hopefully, a better framework today to do that than you did when you started. And sorry, I was not the best at the last, but that's our time. Thanks.
Clear Truth Conference is presented by Redemption Church in Monclova, Ohio. For more clear biblical teaching, visit experienceredemption.com.